Disney's 2022 Willow series was a disaster. And we're here to break down why it failed and what it nearly got right. It's not immediately necessary, but if you want to know more about what we're talking about, we have a Willow recap over here, if you haven't seen the series.
We'll be sharing the biggest mistake it made at the end of the video, but first up, let's talk about the story. The idea for the story wasn't a bad setup. The idea of the prince, Eric, being kidnapped and then everyone having to go find him and get him and having misadventures along the way isn't necessarily bad, but there's nothing original. Nothing new is there.
Boring!
We've seen epic stories about fellowships traveling across the world before, but was there really a story in this case? It just seems to repeat itself over and over again and really goes nowhere.
There's like 3 to 4 kidnappings in this series, constantly around like the end of the episode, so it feels very repetitive after a while.
Also, the story fails due to lack of inspiration and good execution. There's a lack of major plot twists, and most of the story beats really don't matter, or are stretched out so thinly over the entire 8 episodes that you can sometimes forget what the whole point was.
But as a whole, the story was very plain, but it could have been elevated if it had good characters, but unfortunately it did not.
Like we said, the setup was predictable, general fellowship here. Nothing new, nothing good to say about the characters at all really either. Some of them were well acted enough though.
Yes, but a lot of them I think it's almost the direction of the film, not the film, the series, that makes it feel really awkward and very plain. Like there's almost no emotion in a lot of cases. I mean, there is emotion, it's just really hard to feel.
And then when the characters do feel emotion, I don't care because I don't like any of the characters. None of them make themselves appealing at all.
Let's look at the characters real quick. Kit is a very nonchalant character, and unless of course she's getting emo, and she occasionally makes sarcastic comments, and she has a love interest who's another woman.
Jade is the other love interest, a lesbian, who makes sarcastic comments.
Borman is a comedy relief, that's about it.
Willow is the old wizened master who returns in this series and who makes frequent sarcastic comments.
Graydon is simply pathetic, and he doesn't really make any sarcastic comments.
And Laura is the unexpected hero who occasionally makes sarcastic comments. You sense a theme here?
All the characters feel really repetitive, and if one character was completely taken out of the story would not change whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't think any of them have any particular field of speciality except for maybe Willow, who knows the most about magic, but even Graydon knows a good deal about magic and later practices magic too, so a lot of the characters just overlap.
And then Laura eventually starts to learn magic as well. Like she's the apprentice, but then Graydon should also be the apprentice, but then he's not because they also give unequal screen time to these characters as well. But back to what they do, Kit and Jade are basically the same character, except they're like they're both lesbians, both good with a sword. That's their personalities.
That's just about it.
Kit is slightly more boyish, I would argue, although really Jade just doesn't have any characteristics of a human being at all.
That's true. Like they gave Kit sort of a rogue, like a female roguish type character, a bit of a female scoundrel, if you will.
You can tell by the hair and the general dressing.
But Jade is just there.
Jade simply exists for Kit to be in love with. Graydon is pathetic to the point of ridiculousness. I think in some of the dialogue it really shows like, oh, I get scared of this or whatever. Like it doesn't really work with this character because why is he here? And then it doesn't play into the story whatsoever.
It never forms a plot point that they can't do something or hesitates to do something when he should. He's just the scared character.
There are more characters than they are actually characters.
And Alora, this is kind of an interesting thing, is that a lot of them come from sort of a higher raised background, sort of a more of a royal background.
Yeah.
Like 2 of them are from royalty. One of them hangs around a lot with royalty and stuff. But Alora is the one who's the baker. So she comes from a much lower class and has served the royal class for quite a while. But that doesn't actually become a plot point at all. Like their different upbringings don't change anything.
Yes, they all have different backgrounds, but in the end, nothing matters. Also, Eric, which we forgot to mention, is just kind of a womanizer, but he doesn't really feel like he has much of a personality really going for him.
I really, if you had to ask me a question about what he would do in a certain situation, I have no clue.
There's also screen time. Some characters get significantly more screen time than they probably should. For instance, Kit and Alora. They're kind of the main characters of the series, although it's never really explicitly mentioned why. Alora is understandable because, like she's the Alora, like she's the person who's gonna save everyone. So that makes sense. But with Kit, it's like she's just randomly one of the main characters. And then there's another perspective of Eric, but he doesn't like pop up until like way later in the series after he gets kidnapped as to what he's actually doing. And when we see what he's doing, he doesn't do much of anything.
Yeah, pretty much. We just see a little bit before they come to rescue him about where he gets to where he's going. And then he's like evil, as we said in the recap, sus.
But to be fair, it could just be the fact that that's more of a story thing again, where they just can't balance anything.
But there is one thing that they sort of worked. One thing is slightly better than the formula they decided to use for The Last Jedi, in the way that Willow is actually in the series and plays a pretty large part. They didn't exactly Jake Skywalker him, although they didn't do his character justice, but he actually pops up and does something, and he's involved in the story.
He actually has like some motivations for being there, and I think that really helped boost his character.
Although his wife and his son are nowhere to be seen.
And we don't know why. This is a point where they are so focused on making Kit and Alora the main characters. When they start, like, Borman has like this armor thing that's like really powerful, and it's part of his kind of character background. But when the time comes to use it, he just hands it over to Kit so she can use it. It just doesn't really work, because like, what's the point of Borman even being here anymore?
That's a good question.
It's a very much of a wasted storyline.
And then there's a whole, like, there's a little bit of a storyline with Jade, who apparently was letting Kit win during their practice battles all the time. And at the very end, it's never established. Apparently there are more equals now, but I don't know, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't go anywhere. It just goes to show that Kit, I guess, is just as good as Jade now. And Alora just suddenly powers up. She just...
And changes personality. Both motivations and personality are somewhat inconsistent and at times completely forgotten. Like, we occasionally forget about what they're on this whole journey for, but like, I don't know. It's really weird.
The characters have a okay general setup, but none of them are likable and none of them push this. Like, none of the characters actually affect the storyline. But all the characters have humor.
Yes, the humor in the first film was very lighthearted and definitely worked to its benefit. It made it a very fun, very vibrant kind of fantasy. It made you like, oh, that's funny, like that's cool and stuff like that. But in this series, Marvel humor has really permeated everything, and this feels kind of Marvel-esque in the way the humor is delivered, like older Marvel-esque, with like reactionary humor, like, oh, something goofy happened, someone will give them like a little look like, what's that all about? And it just really doesn't fit in this series.
Yeah, pretty much most of the characters have a certain thing that they do that's supposed to be funny, quote unquote. I'm using air quote, funny
or quirky.
Like Graydon makes jokes about being a coward. Borman makes little quips and stuff. Kit is constantly sarcastic. So is Jade and all the rest of them we're talking about. Willow, he's a funny man.
The thing is that it's not football. It's very self-aware humor. Like, oh, this is kind of goofy. Like, you thought this was gonna be this thing or something else, like subverting your expectations. Like, for instance, a good example is the trolls. They don't speak the way that you would expect trolls to speak. They speak very clearly, kind of eloquently, and that's like, oh, that's funny. But it starts to take away from the actual circumstances happening in the real world. Like, how far does humor go? Like, something silly or stupid will happen, but it actually has real dangerous consequences.
Yeah, sometimes you're not sure whether to take what a character said seriously or not, because it could be just a joke.
Should we second to the finale where like there's not as much humor, like everything's serious, but like you expect there to be some kind of weird random joke or something?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's that part where they're turning to stone because of the weird wind that's never really explained. And then Borman's like, oh crap guys, I'm turning to stone.
Is that supposed to be a joke?
I don't know.
Or is it just another poorly delivered line?
It's really hard to tell. Anyway, it just doesn't work.
The humor is really obnoxious, and they put so much in there that just is intolerable after a while.
Yeah, because it definitely needs humor, especially to stand out, just like the original Willow. Because if you compare it to something like, the Hobbit movies or the Rings of Power or whatever, not the ones, the Hobbit movies, sorry, I'll say the Rings of Power. When you compare it to something like the Rings of Power, this definitely has more humor and lightheartedness to it, which is supposed to lend itself to the original concept, the idea that Willow is a very lighthearted story. But unfortunately, the humor doesn't work, so it just becomes distracting.
Something that they could have done, and they almost did, is make this a parody. Like, if this was like a parody of like a fantasy or something like that, then this would work significantly better. There'd be like Mystery Men kind of style of that. I think it would work really well, but for this kind of setting and the way that they executed it, it did not work. On to music.
Yes, the kind of talking about things that don't work but could have been a good idea. They use rather non-traditional music for a fantasy at the end of episodes, and in one case at the beginning of an episode, and I actually kind of like that idea. I think it works pretty well. You set up for the next episode, you have like a rock song or something like that play at the background. It just gives it a whole different mood from something that's a bit more like a typical fantasy.
Yeah, rock and fantasy work really well together, surprisingly. Like Metallica made a song based off of one of Tolkien's works, like The Mountain, I think. Something like that. but Metallica did that. Like, they're a rock band. Like, that's cool.
Yeah, or like if you ever listen to Celtic Rock,
Yeah.
pretty good. Like Fairy Tale, the anime, that has a pretty good soundtrack. It works really well. So they could have really leaned into that and done something, but instead they just used some crappy rock covers, and the rest of the music in the series is just typical fantasy music.
Yes. And the fantasy music in this series doesn't work because when there's a certain like emotional turn in the scene, the music doesn't follow that. It just continues playing a track. It's like when you have a YouTube video, then you have like, oh, let me go run over to YouTube Studio and grab a track. This one fits, and he decided in there, it's like, okay, let's just stretch it over this scene because I don't feel like changing it. It feels exactly like that. Like they don't put, was this even orchestrated? They could have just taken some regular tracks and slapped it on there.
Yeah, they might have. They might have just had the conductor make the score, and then they just stuck it on the episodes as they went along. And like I said before, they used one of these rock songs at the beginning of an episode, and it's some Scooby-Doo shenanigans, I tell you that.
But if the series was consistent in that, then it could have worked.
Yeah, just like it works for Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo's a mystery series. It's not always like, mysterious, creepy music playing. They do different kinds, and it works. It makes it lighthearted and fun, but they just threw it in one episode in the beginning, which threw me off.
Yes, another thing that's inconsistent was dialogue.
High Priestess, sent from sorceress of the 9 realms, and the world's last, best hope against the evil coming to destroy us all.
Acting.
Occasionally it's very fantasy-esque. Other times it's like watching Millennials.
Yeah, sometimes it goes from someone making a long, eloquent speech to somebody saying, I don't know,
Like, bro, what's that all about?
yeah, or dude, let's go.
The usage, it's just very inconsistent. Like, the script writing was not very well thought out. It was not very refined, or it was not consistent. Like, they just like, okay, let's just write some dialogue and like some witty stuff and banter and things like that. But it doesn't work with the dialogue that it has. Like, it's very millennial-esque.
If Her Highness is in such a hurry to see it done, she ought to do it herself.
Yeah, it really it's pointed out a lot by the different acting styles used by the different actors and actresses, especially with Kit. That's the most notable one, is she sticks out like a sore thumb because she acts like she's acting on a Disney Channel high school series or something.
Yeah, she plays the straight man in the comedy a little too much. And then, like, it just doesn't work.
It breaks the immersiveness.
Indeed. It's like, what is the immersiveness? And in terms of immersiveness, there's also clothing or whatever. Like, everyone's just kind of like got the same thing on, like some kind of weird kind of cloak-ish thing. That's it.
Pretty much.
I find it really interesting, by the way, that they didn't... Is this supposed to be like a covert mission?
I don't know. They never really
Because they don't have any like guards or like knights or anything like that. All of them have no armor whatsoever. Even the guy who I think got stabbed, although I thought he had some kind of chainmail or something, but maybe not. But it's really weird how none of them really wear armor until we later hear about the cuirass or whatever it's called. That's the only time we see armor.
That's a good point. Nobody's dressed ready for an adventure. Nobody brought any extra weapons. Also, then at one point, one of them randomly has a bow and a quiver, but we didn't see them wear a quiver earlier. And was the bow on the horse? I don't know. They all wear different stuff that doesn't seem to match the time period they're trying to replicate.
Yeah, if you just showed me these images of these characters, I'd say it could be a fantasy, but surely they're not the main character. Not nearly flashy enough or fantasy-esque enough. It's just like some weird side quest stuff.
And then we have the magic system, which I can appreciate a soft magic system, like from Lord of the Rings and other things.
Yeah,
you know?
even the first Willow.
Even the first Willow, that was a pretty soft magic system. But this one is just diarrhea.
It's it's ridiculous about how little they try to explain anything in the series. Magic specifically, but even anything in the series isn't really explained.
At the very end of the series, I'm still somewhat confused as to who was doing what and where, and what the purpose of the crone is in comparison to the worm, and what their goal is.
Why they possessed Eric. What was Eric ever possessed? Because like, oh, well, maybe he's gullible, but like, I don't know. Then there's like Willow's magic stuff. Like, it was kind of like pretty soft and everything in the first movie, but then they still had like smoke screen. I forget whether that was magic based or not.
It might have been an alchemy type.
I'm going to assume it's maybe not, because that seems another discussion anyway. But the way that they use magic in this thing, it's like, oh, he can just shoot out bolts and it blows them away. But also, it can also disintegrate them. But also, he's got to go save his magic. I don't know how he builds up magic in the first place, but he's going to go use it anyway because like he's going to teach a lore. But like, it's really weird how
also
it flows.
The same stone in the staff that shoots lasers. Also, if you hold it up to Eric when he's like being possessed, that you can draw him out of the light or something.
And I don't know how Willow knows this.
Also, you can just be possessed by somebody's like sticking a brand to you or something. Like that's a little bit overpowered, I should say.
Also, Willow when it gets a flamethrower, you know, maybe more than just magic, it's just like general combat in general. Like it's really weird. Like he just has a flamethrower. He never uses it for the rest of the series or before this moment.
Yeah. Also, everybody's got swords, but nobody's got a shield. What's with that?
I don't know. Maybe this is just a weapons section. There's no shields. Why doesn't someone have a bow and arrow?
I don't know. Yeah, it'd be something you'd really want to bring along for both hunting purposes and for self-defense. But
which is interesting that they don't actually really eat too much in this series. Well, yeah, but it just the general immersiveness is just so not there. That's ridiculous. But the biggest problem with the Willow series and why it inevitably is a failure
is because it didn't deserve to exist, nor does it expand on the original in any meaningful way.
The first one was a very nice little tidy story that everyone can enjoy. I can't think of anyone who's like, I hate Willow, but I love this, because Willow was just fun. And it didn't need to have a continuation, like maybe it could have had a movie or something, but the way they continued it in this series had nothing to do with the original at all, almost. Except that it has a lore, maybe now, the main character.
Yeah, it just does it a disservice. It didn't need to exist. People were, it's like somebody was told, hey, you need to make a Willow sequel, or you get to make a Willow sequel, and they're like, yay! I don't really know what the first Willow was about. I guess I'll continue the story.
And my theory is that it wasn't even supposed to be Willow. It's like, there's no reason it needs to be Willow except for Laura being a continual character. If it was its own original thing, I could have had a little bit more respect for it. But as it is, it's like, it's some kind of weird, cheap money grab thing that people are just yum, just grabbing all up and everything. Probably because of, I will say probably because of some maybe woke things, but there's no point in this series existing at all.
It doesn't matter that Kit's father is Mad Mardigan.
Because Mad Mardigan's not in the series.
It doesn't matter that none of the other characters really matter at all either.
It has nothing to do with the original.
It's just disconnected.
Willow's daughter doesn't even have that much to do in the story.
No, it just continues the story unnecessarily.
And so far along later, it's ridiculous. But those are our thoughts on why it failed. If you're interested in more fantasy content, you should go click this video over here. Until then, he's Mio.
And he's Keto.
And we'll see you later.
Bye. Bye.